Okay, that is fine.
So before we start, I really like to thank you for doing this for the Rangers Union in Cascavel, Paraná. And
Right.
before we start with the questions, we would like to know more about like what made you follow this like welfare and like study the changes in animal behavior. Like what could we do better for animals? Like what was your professional like history? Like if you can like summary that a little bit.
Okay. Well, when I first started out, this was a long time ago in the 70s, um, I noticed that cattle would see a shadow
Mhm,
or a piece of chain hanging down in a handling facility. It would make them stop.
mhm,
And I was the first person to really look at what cattle were seeing and that affected their handling. And then in my early work, I worked a lot on the design of the facilities. And that's half of it. And the other half of it is the stockmanship and how people handle the animals. It's you need to have both.
mhm,
You know, when I first started out, I was more from the design and engineering standpoint, designing the facilities. And then as I learned more about animal behavior, I took some really good animal behavior courses. This
mhm,
brings up another thing that's important. What gets students interested in something? I took a wonderful animal behavior class in college. I was exposed to cattle as a teenager. These are two things that got me interested in this. And and there's a lot of advantages to low stress handling. Safety for the people, safety for the animals, less likely to get hurt, but also productivity advantages.
mhm,
And there's now a lot of studies that show that animals that are afraid of people gain less weight. Animals that become highly agitated when you handle them and restrain them for vaccinations gain less weight. My first graduate student did some of the early research on that just about 25 years ago.
Oh, yeah, that's nice to know. And I think the world now is in progress and thinking more about animal welfare. So this is really good. So going to the questions, those questions were made by some rangers of the union, like uh, they were interested in something, and now people in Brazil are turning to like are starting to be concerned.
Okay,
First
that's
one that
fine.
we have is like, what are the main benefits of adopting the gentle handling policy on the farms?
Well, I think I may have already answered some of that already with
Hmm.
some of the scientific research on the importance of gentle handling
Hmm.
and good stockmanship. More productive animals, better weight gain. If you're doing artificial insemination, better conception rates, more calves. Animals that are afraid of people and run from people are less productive animals. It pays to have good stockmanship. And over the years, handling of cattle has definitely improved. Compared to 10 or 15 years ago in the US, there's been some very, very big improvements in handling. But you have to start out with just basics. Stop screaming at cattle. Don't hit cattle. When you scream at cattle, they know you're mad at them because it has intent. They just hear some machinery running that doesn't have intent the same way. So calm down. Your first step handling cattle is to calm down. Because if you get them all excited and fearful, it takes 20 or 30 minutes to calm down. So if you brought them into the corrals and they were agitated and fearful, give them 20 minutes to calm down before you handle
Okay, that's good to know. The second question that we have, what are the main recommendations regarding facilities for handling beef and dairy cattle? And what is the percentage of use of them today in the US, or and if you know in the worldwide?
Well, people are getting better and better facilities, and we have two kinds of producers in the U.S. We have large producers, big feed yards and ranches, expensive permanent kind of corrals, like I show in this book, humane
Mhm,
livestock handling. Um, we also have a lot of producers on rented or leased land, so they're going to be using facilities made out of portable panels. And in this book, I've got designs for portable panels where you can move the facilities around.
Mhm.
And there's some places where you just have to get basic facilities. You need to have a single file race and a head restrainer. That's the minimum. You have to have
Mhm.
something to hold them in so that you can handle them. The public's getting more and more interested in animal welfare. When videos show up online of handling cattle roughly, public has a very negative view of the industry. It's another reason for good animal handling. Everybody has this, and
Yes,
it's a video.
that's an issue that could be helpful, but also could be an issue, especially for people that they don't know a lot. Like I've seen this kind of thing happening before. Sometimes we are handling with cattle they don't know, they've never seen before. They sometimes think that you are like making them sick or treating them like in an awful way. So this could be a like an instrument that's good, but it's also like sometimes show people just show stuff like some parts and could be negative too.
Well,
Um,
the thing is, there's also some basic handling things. I have a
mhm,
lot of information on grandin.com. That's
mhm,
my cattle webpage. It's my last name, grandin.com. I have some Spanish and Portuguese information on that.
mhm,
But there's some basic principles of handling cattle, like flight zone and point of balance, that if people understand a few very basic principles, it will help a lot. You walk out into the pasture, the cows will turn around and look at you.
mhm,
But then if you walk towards them, they'll move away. That's because you've entered the edge of the flight zone. Now, the size of the flight zone is going to vary depending upon how wild the cattle are. And there's three factors that affect that. Genetics. Some animals, like the Nelore, for example,
yeah,
compared to the Angus or the Jersey, is going to be more startled and get scared more easily. And we usually have a bigger flight zone. Amount of contact with people and the quality of that contact. Cattle that have been screamed at and hit are going to have a bigger flight zone than cattle that are handled calmly. Now, if you have an animal rear up in a race, back off, back away from it, get out of its flight zone, and then it will usually go back down again. Another little principle, when you're moving animals through a single file race, if the cattle are going this way, okay, imagine my end of my hand is the head of the cattle.
mhm,
And if you walk by them this way, like this, when you cross the shoulder line, they'll go forward. Try it. Cattle's headed this way, and you walk by them like this. When you cross the shoulder line, they will move forward in the single file race. And the diagrams are on grandin.com, and they're in both of my books. Real simple thing to try. Another mistake people make is they stand at the head of an animal and poke it on the butt. That does not work because you're telling it to go forward and back at the same time. Another really basic principle is you have a funnel or crowd pen that
mhm.
leads up to your single file race. Is people jam that full of too many cattle. Move smaller groups. It's going to take more walking. And I find I still need to talk about these things because there was a huge survey done in Texas about 2 years ago with 39 large feed yards on
Mhm.
stockmanship and cattle handling. And yes, that was about half the people doing it right. That's a big improvement compared to 10 or 15 years ago. But you still had too many people yelling, hitting the side of the equipment with a driving aid, bringing too large a group up, jamming the crowd pen full. We still have to just work on some of these basics.
Yeah, sure, we do. And here, because of the reason we have, actually, this is one of the questions. Sometimes people scream because they think it's more effective. They try to push like large amount of cattle because they think will be faster. But we
Mm-mm.
still have to work this here. And this leads us for the third question, actually. That's like how ranchers can measure their effectiveness of their actions in favor of animal welfare and financial results. And I think you already answered the last
I
part
think
of
I
this
already
question.
answered that. And the other thing is, when cattle get scared and excited, they injure people. And trip to the hospital is not something you want to do. And that's another reason for good cattle handling.
Yeah. And going to the next question, like the results of managements aim at animal welfare are directly related to labor on the rural property. What must be done with the employees to achieve the desired results?
What I have found with employees is training. There's a lot of problems with animal handling. They just don't know. And then you show people, the trick of walking back by them.
Mhm.
You show that to people. And then you also have to figure out in your facility, what is the correct number of cattle to put in the crowding pen that leads up to your single file. And maybe at one property or ranch, it might be 5 large cows. Somewhere else, maybe 10 will work. At a very small facility, it might be 3. So you figure out what works really well in your facility, and then you have to enforce it. And you say it's 5 or 6 cows. And you have to make sure they do it, because the good handling will require more walking. Another important thing is electric prodders and goads. You never carry those around in your hand. There's only one place you might need an electric prod, and that's to get it into the head restraint. But usually you don't need that. And never carry them around in your hand. And what I have found on training people is there's kind of 3 ways that people react to stockmanship and cattle handling training. You've got the person that when you train them, they become a wonderful, really good stock person, a really good cattle handler.
Mhm.
When you show them a few things like flights on and point of balance. Then you've got other people you just have to constantly monitor. It's sort of like speeding out on the highway. If the police weren't measuring with the radar and other electronic devices, you'd have a racetrack out on the highway. And then, unfortunately, there's a few people that should not be handling animals. They enjoy being mean to them and hurting them. And what we found this to be true, I did a really big project with McDonald's a number of years ago where we were auditing the meat factories. And we were using a measurement system that's similar to our beef quality assurance, measuring things like electric prod use, cattle vocalization when you restrain them, cattle running, cattle falling. And we had to remove about 10% of the people. I know that's not very nice, but some people need to be fixing fences or repairing vehicles or something like that, and not working with cattle. And it's not a nice thing to say, but I've been in this industry for a lot of years. But the good news is that when, let's say, you train your people, there's about 20% of people that will become excellent at working with cattle if they just get a little bit of training.
Mm-hmm.
So you see, you've got both sides here.
And do you think,
and your best person you need to put in the back, bringing them up.
Okay.
You need your best person bringing the cattle up.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe someone who's not so good can give the vaccinations, and you can watch them and make sure the vaccinations are given properly. That's where I put the person as one of my not so good people, because then I could say it. But you want your best stock person bringing the cattle up and loading the race.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you put your best person, because if you keep them calm in the back, then when you put them in the head restrainer, they're calm and they're much easier to vaccinate.
And do you have to retrain those people, or those 20% never have to be retrained? Because some managements we recommend to once a year or 2 years, we do a recycling training for the ranchers or the employees at the farm. So about animal welfare handling, do you think we always have to retrain people?
The other thing, well, and you don't want to use the same video or something like every year. That gets too boring. The other thing you must not do is overwork and understaff. Because if you do that, people get so tired they don't care. It's any job. I have a student out right now. He's on a job right now. He's working like 6, 11-hour shifts every week, and he's so tired. That just does not work. Well, he's not working for me, those kind of shifts. He's working for somebody else, but that is not sustainable. People that are tired and work so hard that they're just too tired, they're not going to be doing good work. They're not going to give the vaccinations properly. But the other thing we need to be training staff on is the importance of animal welfare, and that the public really cares about this. And we have to look at everything we do with cattle and go, how would this look if somebody took video with this and put it up online? And the other thing is, if you brought your friends from the city out to your farm, how would they react to some of the stuff that you were doing?
Yeah, that's
Animal welfare. And you see, the other thing in animal welfare, and I have a whole book about animal welfare right here, Animal Welfare, a Practical Approach. Animal welfare, a practical approach, is we got to prevent suffering. We absolutely have to prevent suffering. But that's not enough. The emphasis now on animal welfare is we also have to look at, does the cattle have a positive life, good emotions? And beef cattle out on grass, those animals probably have some of the best welfare of all our farm animals. Pigs and laying hens that live inside, there's many more welfare issues with them than there is with beef cattle. Beef cattle, one of the big welfare issues is how do you handle them? And then you have to make sure they don't get too skinny or lame. These are things that you also would measure. Sick, they've got to have good health. But from a welfare standpoint, the way the animal is housed is not an issue. It's out on pasture.
Good. You said it before, the Nelore breed. Like here, the base of our beef herd, it's like the Nelore breed. And because it's a zebu breed, the animals are more reactive. So what would be the best managed method for those type of animals? Would be like nothing on the hands or driving with the use of flags? What would you recommend for those animals?
Well, one thing is we'll work with a lot of animals is, acclimating them. Paranas da Costa in Brazil, and he's a cattle handling specialist in Brazil, really, really good one. And one of the things that he does is when you put the Nelores through the raceway, give them a feed reward. Give them a feed reward. Another thing you want to do is, as soon as they're through the raceway, they come out of this, get them away from the corrals. That also is going to help. I had a chance to, just before COVID started, to handle some Angus Nelore crosses at a meat plant. They were bulls. They were beautiful animals. And you see, this is where the calm handling is even more important with the Nelore. We did a cattle handling demonstration where we had ranchers and farmers coming in the university cattle handling facility, and we had to do like 4 demonstrations for 4 different groups of people, and we had to use a new bunch of Nelore every time. But there was one crossbred dairy cross animal. She was fine with doing 4 demonstrations. See, this is where you really saw the difference in the temperament. She went through the facility 4 times. The Nelore, no, they went through it once. But it's also important, with an animal that's more flighty, spend time with them. Then you can reduce the flight zone. Spend time walking amongst the cattle. Spend time riding amongst the cattle. Also, cattle differentiate between a person riding a horse and a person walking on the ground. It's very important that cattle learn how to react quietly to both the horse and rider and the person on the ground. Because think about it, person on the ground is a different picture in the mind of the animal than a person on a horse. So I've seen situations where the cattle handled beautifully to the person on the horse, and they got really wild when they were handled by the person on the ground because the flight zone got bigger in small set of corrals. No, they need to learn how to be moved with both. Because when they go to an auction or they go to a meat plant, they're going to be handled by people on foot.
Yeah, this is good to know. And you said like about beef plants. What do you think? What is the influence on the gentle dealing in meat quality?
Do what? Okay, meat quality.
Yeah.
The last 5 minutes at slaughter is really, really critical. If animals are jumping all around and showing signs of stress, like a lot of loose diarrhea and manure, liquid manure, eye white, tail switching, their whole rear end is covered with manure in the last 5 minutes, that animal is likely to have tough meat. There was research done by Robin Warner in Australia, and she found that at the meat works or the slaughterhouse, that electric prodders in that last 5 minutes, tougher meat. Also, you're more likely to get bruises, damaged meat that they would have to cut out of an animal, and so that handling is really important. The good handling, good trucking, not overloading trucks, that's going to, reduce bruises. Having good facilities does matter. It definitely does make a difference to have good facilities. They don't have to be the fanciest, but you have to have at least adequate facilities. Let's just look at some simple things. Non-slip flooring in the loading ramp, because when animals start to slip, they panic. If you're weighing animals on a single animal scale and they start doing a lot of little slips like this, they just get completely excited and jump all around. And then you put some non-slip flooring in that scale, some non-slip flooring in the in the restrainer, the floor of the restrainer. You can also try where you're working the restrainer, the cattle can see you as they come in. Try putting a piece of cardboard up on the side of that restrainer, so as they come in, they don't see you standing there to work the head, to work this. Just experiment with some pieces of cardboard. You don't like it, you can take it off. But sometimes they'll come in more easily. Also, distractions that will make the cattle stop, like a chain hanging down, a coat on a fence. If they're calm, they'll look right at it, show you. One of the big problems I've seen is vehicles parked alongside a facility, trucks and cars, and just moving the vehicles away. Getting dogs away from the single file chute. I've seen dogs used really well out in the pasture, but I hate them around the working facility, biting at cattle, and then they don't want to come in.
And like you already said some things, but they also ask like, what are the main mistakes that are made in the handling of the animals inside the slaughterhouses?
Yelling, same mistakes. Electric prods. This is where management has to, monitor this. And there's auditing system that we use. I developed personally for our American Meat Institute, which is now the North American Meat Institute, and we measure stunning. Did you make it dead on a single shot? If they can't do 95%, they fail a McDonald's audit. We were doing that 20 years ago. Electric prod use. Get a really good score, it's 5%. Falling down. It should be 1% or less. Bellowing when you handle them. You should be able to get an animal into a stun box or into a head restraint, and it should not be bellowing. because it's getting really stressed, and we measure.
Mhm.
And the distractions are really important. You have shadows. In fact, my student Dennis Wilson just finished up a study and is available online. He did this at a small slaughterhouse, and when the sun made sharp shadows of the fences, you had more balking and stopping. They'd stop. And if animal sees something on the floor it doesn't like, it will stop, put the head down, look at a drain, look at a shadow, look at, I don't know, a coat that's on the ground or something, and wait for it to bring the head back up before you push it. Give it a chance to look at the distraction and then get rid of it. Because calm animals will show you things they don't like in the facility. But you can improve a lot of facilities with non-slip flooring. Also putting up some solid panels, especially on the outer perimeter, because I do not want them seeing vehicles parked around there, people walking by, and vehicles going by on the highway.
Yeah,
And there's a lot more information and pictures on my website and in my books.
Access.
Now I have a video that's up online called General Cattle Handling. Temple Grandin General Cattle Handling. If you want to take that and put subtitles on it, that'd be just fine, because that shows pictures of the facilities. It will show pictures of how to walk back by the cattle and get them to move up. It will have pictures of all those things. And then this book right here has pictures. Now here's the little movement patterns. Kind of hard to see it there, but those are also on the website on grandin.com.
Nice.
And that's free.
Yeah, I think it's great for everybody because now everybody have access for that. So there's not an excuse to see like, I don't have access, I don't know. So it's easier for everybody and this like to have to see that. And do you think there are any differences, like how should dairy or beef cattle that are confined should be treated?
Well, Holstein dairy cattle are much calmer than the lower, much calmer. Because when we did that cattle handling demonstration 4 times, it was a dairy cross animal that was perfectly calm and willing to go through the races 4 times. So in the lorry, we used new cattle for each demonstration. That there's the difference in the genetics of the animal. But the good stockmanship is also very important for dairy cattle. And there's been research on this. Dairy cattle that run away from people, that have been yelled at, hit, have lower milk production. There's been a lot of research on this. Yes, this definitely applies to dairy cattle. I mean, stockmanship and gentle, good cattle handling matters. But the other problem we've got, if you overwork and understaff, then people milking animals and handling gets tired, that their way they do things will get worse.
And about this handling, there are like new technologies emerging for livestock management, such as drones. So what's your opinion of the inclusion of these new technologies for managing animals?
Well, drones are really useful for looking at pasture. Cattle, if you fly a drone up high and then you bring it down slowly like this, they'll just stare at it. Now, if you fly a drone low and fast over the top of cattle, they're going to scatter. Yeah, don't do that. Now there's other technologies, virtual fencing, solar powered electric fencing. These are great technologies for grazing management. And what you do with these technologies is you duplicate the way herds of wild ruminants, antelopes and wildebeest, a bison used to graze. They would come in, graze an area, very tightly stocked, mow the grass, and then move on. So what you do is you use a virtual fence, which would be collars, GPS collars, or portable electric fencing to make animals graze. because if you just let them, to make them graze one location, you just let them scatter out, then they eat the tasty things, sort of like they'll eat the really tasty things and they leave the celery behind.
Mm.
Fred Provenza, who's an expert on grazing, says they eat the best and leave the rest. And the other thing we've got to start doing with cattle, this is something I'm getting interested in, as animal agriculture is getting attacked more and more, is if we use our grazing animals right, they improve the land. We use grazing animals wrong and wreck land. So we need to be using grazing animals right. Now I know that grazing land now is, some of it's getting converted to eucalyptus trees in southern parts of South America. Well, those need to be spaced far enough apart so that you can have silver pasture where you graze cattle in amongst the trees. We need to be getting the grazing animal mixed in, integrated in with crops. Like where I live, I just got back from Nebraska and they raised corn and soy, but our really progressive farmers are then doing a cover crop and grazing some cattle on it. The grazing animals, I mean, you look at Africa, for example, all these ruminant grazing animals, been there forever, and we need to be, we can do really good things with grazing animals. There's a lot of land in the world that the only thing it can be used for is grazing animals. And we need to be using them to improve the land, and tearing down rainforests is not where you do it. I'll be real plain about that. That's not where you do it. But there's all kinds of, I've been in all of the main cattle raising areas in Brazil and Uruguay. We need to start doing some really progressive things with grazing animals and show how we can actually improve the environment with them.
And do you think there's like a checklist or something that a producer like a rancher should do to start to initiate this change in management? Like should they start with something before and then go on?
Well, the first thing is, gentle, low stress, good cattle handling. That's going to be one of the first things that you would do. We've already discussed that. The next thing is better grazing management. And now we do have technologies for that. I'm really, interested in these solar powered electric fences that are easy to move. The GPS collars are getting to where the cost is starting to get reasonable. And these things can be used to, control grazing, because we've got to also manage the land better. That is another thing that we've got to do.
Nice. And about this like welfare legislation, do you know which countries have included the welfare legislation, or if just is mainly a consumer demand?
Well, in UK has a lot of UK, Europe has a lot of animal welfare legislation. The US has only a few things on trucking, and also and a humane slaughtering is strictly regulated. But what in the US, what's made a lot of improvements is consumer pressure. Large corporations that buy meat inspecting farms. I've done a lot of consulting with buyers, and that's resulted in a lot of improvements. When you have a customer that wants things done right, that's a motivation to do things right.
And like going more through this to the slaughterhouses, do you see like what are the differences between like immersion bath and the spray shower bath like it's done in the Brazilian slaughterhouse? Which one do you think it's better?
Well, I don't like something where you spray them right in the eyes. They really don't like that. And see, here in the US, we don't wash cattle. That's just not done here. One of the reasons is the northern US is extremely cold compared to Brazil. You wouldn't want to be washing cattle when it's that cold. You see, Australia and New Zealand wash cattle, but they don't get as cold as northern US does, or Canada does. See, Europe doesn't usually wash cattle. But the one thing I really object to is a lot of water just jetting
Okay.
right in your eyes. You want to avoid that.
Yeah, even as we don't like water in the eyes, so.
Well, they don't like water blasting in their eyes either.
Mhm. And what do you think about using like gas stunning in cattle slaughter?
Well, I think it's not going to be very practical. Also, in CO2 stunning of pigs, there's been concerns about being really aversive. There's species difference in animals. Gas stunning of chickens works really well. Well,
Mhm.
birds are a different species than cattle or pigs. And with broiler chickens, if they're put through a tunnel where the CO2 level raises very gradually, it works really well in broiler chickens, really, really well. And it greatly improves the welfare because you're no longer hanging live birds on shackles. And when you hang live birds on shackles, that's extremely stressful. You're now hanging dead chickens or unconscious chickens on shackles. I was just recently in a plant that has a new CAS, controlled atmosphere stunning system. And one question you get asked, well, how about the dead chickens? Well, there was a person there as the drawers with the chickens in it came down on a conveyor. There's a person there. He was pulling out the dead chickens before they went into the tunnel. That's what they were doing. Pigs is a different animal than a chicken. And normally in those systems, they put the pig into high concentration of CO2. And what I observed is that some pigs kind of calmly go to sleep and other pigs go completely berserk and crazy, screeching and trying to get out because the CO2 is kind of hurts their nose and throat. Now, I think there's a genetic difference in how pigs react to CO2 because I've seen such a wide range of reactions from really good to really terrible. Now, this is where you have to look at your handling. You handle the pigs in the CO2 system, you move them up in groups, it's real easy to make the handle. But there's some pigs where it's really bad, and they're probably corrected with genetics. Cattle's an animal that naturally goes in single file. You know, you've all looked in the pasture and you've seen the little paths that the cows make in the pasture. And so it's an animal that naturally goes in single file. So going up a single file race, cattle do that just fine. And captive bolt stunning works really well. It's instantaneous. Biggest problem I have seen with captive bolt stunning is failure to maintain the equipment. That equipment requires constant, very careful maintenance. You know, there's different types of stunning equipment, air operated, cartridge fired. Cartridge fired, you have to be very careful to keep the cartridges dry. The air operated, you've got to make sure you have a big enough compressor to run it. But you have to maintain it. And I've been in this industry now almost 50 years, and you have to constantly, management has to constantly make sure that every day the guns are maintained. The handheld ones, you got to take them apart every single day. And you've got to maintain them. And they require a lot of maintenance. They're a high maintenance item because that captive bolt has to hit really hard. And when it gets worn, it loses the bolt velocity and then it'll be less effective. But they work extremely well if you take care of
them. And what are your considerations about marrow section? Do you have any alternatives?
On what now?
Marrow section, like you could section.
Marrow section. I don't know what that is.
It's like they would cut the marrow here. There are some
they're cutting the ear to
the bone
mark.
marrow, like here, the spine.
You mean as a way to kill them?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that's called punctilla in Spanish. Where, in other words, is the best way to make cattle unconscious is captive bolt right here. So So this is a place where they're just stabbing them in the back of the neck.
Mm-hmm.
That is bad. That is bad. Because when you sever the spine right here, the brain stays alive for a while.
Mm-hmm.
The body will be paralyzed and the brain will stay alive for
Mm-hmm.
a minute.
Yeah, I
No,
think they're asking
that
this
is
question
not acceptable.
because
You were using a term for it that I didn't understand.
no, I think they're asking this question because we have some buffalo ranchers, like the water buffalo, and their bone here it's very thick and large.
Okay, now
So
you're talking about cutting the spine or shooting them with a captive bolt in the back of the head.
no, cutting the spine.
Just cutting the spine. See, that's why I've got to make sure I know exactly what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, take a gun and shoot them in the head right there. Best thing to do.
Okay.
Something larger than a 22 caliber or buffalo. And the American Veterinary Medical Association has guidelines on slaughter. They give you some places where you can get guidelines for free. They are in English. AVMA, that stands for American Veterinary Medical Association.
Mm-hmm.
They have humane slaughter guidelines and euthanasia guidelines. And that also
Mhm.
includes pets.
Mm-hmm.
And you can just type in AVMA humane slaughter into a search engine, into Google. AVMA humane slaughter, and those guidelines will come up and they're free.
Mm-hmm.
And another place where there's a lot of free information is animalhandling.org.
Mm-hmm.
Animalhandling.org. And the audit document for evaluation of meat plant is free.
Mm-hmm.
It's got those same diagrams I talked about, flight zone, the point of balance, that's in there. Those documents are free. It's animalhandling.org
Mm-hmm.
and AVMA humane slaughter.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it also, there's a euthanasia document for, you know, if you have to do it on the farm. No, but just cutting the spine. The OIE, the World Animal Health Organization, also definitely says you should not be cutting the spine
Mm-hmm.
as your method of destroying the animal.
Mm-hmm.
You got to make it unconscious first.
Right. And now actually it's a personal question. We are seeing a lot of like people are concerned about like the cow-calf separation, especially in dairy farms, like the cow, it's calving and then you separate the calf right in the beginning because people are concerned about the health issues with the calf. And now public is not looking this like in a very good way.
Well, this
So-
issue's come up in the US too on separating dairy calves from the cow.
Mhm.
Now that's been going on for years and years and years. This is not a large dairy, something large dairy's invented. It's been going on for a very long time. And of course in beef, the calf stays with the mother.
Mhm.
You know, this is why when it comes to welfare, the way we house the animal, beef has the least amount of problems. Now, there's a few people doing some very innovative things where you leave the calf on the cow. I went to the Yucatan of Mexico, where they had Brahmin Holstein cross
Mhm.
dairy cows, and they left the calves on them. The calves learned to wait outside the milking room, and they would leave 1/4, 1 teat for the calf. You know, now today we got fancy milking equipment, and here's something I could do with tech. So we could leave calves on cows is I could program that milking equipment to not milk her all the way out and leave some there for the calf. That'd be easy to do with that equipment, the fancy equipment we've got now. And then you have to train the calves not to come in the parlor, because if you've got a rotary parlor, I do not want calves in there. But they can be easily trained to stay outside. Maybe that's something they need to start looking at. And I went to a place right here where I live where they were using beef bulls on the Holstein dairy cows, and that produces a very nice calf that makes a great meat animal. And I think we're going to start getting a lot more innovative on things, innovative with grazing stuff. I know we've got to show the world that we can use the grazing animal, and that's to include Holstein dairy cows, definitely in that, to improve land, improve soil. We've got too many people think that ranchers wreck land with cattle. Like in my country, if we lose our family ranchers, we're not going to have people to take care of the land. Good family ranchers, we have some very good ones, take care of the land, and they take care of the environment. And right now we've had a drought in the western United States, so ranchers are having a terrible time. They don't have enough water for their cattle.
Yeah, this is the big issue that we are facing. What we've seen here, it's sometimes the children that don't want to stay in the land. So like the rancher goes.
Well, the other problem that we've got, okay, is that taxes on the land have gotten so high that children can't afford to get the land. See, now it's going to be different in different countries. You know, sometimes the children don't want to do it, but other times, you know, we've got people buying up huge amounts of land.
Yeah, we have to work in a lot of
And
parts.
right now you're doing, you know, the planting eucalyptus trees. You got to make sure those get planted far enough apart so you can graze on them. Okay, solar panels. One of the things we're doing with solar panels now is putting sheep underneath them. And you have to space the panels. Don't space the panels this close together. Space them this far apart. So a little bit of sun can get in there and you can graze shade. Now, if you're going to graze cattle under solar panels, you're going to have to put them up higher because cattle will wreck solar panels using them to scratch them. They'd have to put up high enough so they absolutely cannot touch them. But sheep, you put up just standard solar panels, the way they put up, you can put sheep under them. I mean, these are the kind of things that we got to start getting innovative. We're using livestock to graze land in certain areas of the U.S. for fire suppression. Bring goats in, you know, graze out the brush, sheep, bring them in, graze out. We got to start figuring out really innovative ways to use the grazing animal. And I'm going to include the goats and the sheep. Okay, we have bison. You know, some other, where else they got some other different animal, but use it to improve the land. And I want to mention cutting down rainforest. That's not where they should be. Now, some of the stuff I've read about that, gold mining is way worse. I've read this stuff about gold mining. It's worse than the cattle grazing. No, that's not the place to be doing it. We need to be doing it in southern Brazil. And that's where we need to be. Now, there's a lot of things we're going to have to change. I'm trying to just look way into the future. I've seen some really interesting papers on silver pasture, where you're combining like eucalyptus trees and raising cattle. And it has some real advantages because the trees provide shade and the cattle are going to be less heat stressed.
And the manure will help the trees too. So,
well, that's right. And then you also may be using some electric fencing because you don't want the cattle to just graze all the really tasty stuff and leave behind the weeds. And you see, originally when you have we had the herds of bison, the predators would keep them bunched. So they'd graze an area in a bunch, mow that grass, and then move to another place. See, what we got to do is duplicate that with electric fencing.
well, like the list of questions that I had ended, but I think we had a really good interview, and I would like to thank you for your time, for answering all those questions. For us, this is really important if we are thinking changing animal welfare, if we are thinking on the
And
future environment.
also some of these pasture things where we're combining livestock with other things,
Mhm.
we can have very, very high welfare in something like solar pasture, or you put sheep under solar panels. You can have really good welfare. But if you space the panels this far apart, you're not going to have very good pasture under there.
Mhm.
But I think we have to start, integrating these things. I mean, we can graze cattle in places where you've got wind power. We have a lot of that going on in Texas. Cattle graze there.
Mhm.
We start getting really innovative, because what I learned from an agronomist, I'll just end up on this. We had an agronomist, an
Mhm.
expert in crops, give a seminar at our animal science department. This is why it's so important to get outside your field of expertise. And what I learned from this agronomist, and it was a really big kind of revelation, is that the grazing animal, which in the US would be bison, created the best farmland that we have in Iowa and Illinois. That land was created by grazing animal, herding grazing animal.
Mhm.
Yeah, we need to be using cattle that do that. And that means, like for us, instead of just raising corn and soy, every third year you plant a cover crop
Mhm.
that cattle can graze. And you're going to end up better soil health, and you won't need to use so many chemicals. You still need to use a little chemicals, but you can really improve the land. And the really innovative farmers are already doing that. I was just in Nebraska. They're doing some good things there. And I was really pleased when people were telling me, well, I go out driving the countryside and I see crops, I don't know what they are. I go, good. We've got to get away from monoculture.
Mhm.
Monoculture works in the short run, and in the long run, it wrecks everything.
Yeah, we have to integrate more, uh, and think about welfare, animal, people, soil, everything.
Well, that's right. And I think it's really good that you've got people in Brazil and other parts of South America. You've got Primus da Costa
Mhm.
doing a lot of work on cattle handling. He's done a tremendous amount of work. There's Marcus Sapiola in Argentina, um, doing work in low stress handling, and maybe some slight differences in how they teach it, but it's still the same thing. You're going to have more productive animals. They're going to be safer to work with, more fun to work with if you use gentle, handling methods.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. So, I think we ended ended our interview. So once again, thank you for taking your time, spending with us, spending with the Union of the Cascavel Ranchers. I think we had like wonderful information. You give us like the gold.
Okay, well then I'm going to sign off now, and it was great to be here.
Thank you very much.